Hello, everybody. Welcome to Julie's Unknown. I am so excited. Today, I have Rebecca here, and she is a transformational coach and TEDx speaker, supporting leaders and entrepreneurs through their journey of leading themselves first. And I am excited because me and Rebecca hopped on a coffee chat, as I do with a lot of my podcast guest speakers. And we just had, I loved her energy. I love the conversation where it flowed. So I cannot wait to bring this here onto the table. So Rebecca, how did you get into being a transformational coach and TEDx speaker? That's amazing.
That's funny. I actually just came back from doing my second TEDx. So I did two in 1 year. I had the first one was released the same week as I went on stage for the second one. So it's been a very eventful month so far. So I got into personal development practically, I feel like since I was born. My mom was into personal development, so she raised us with some of the standard things that people learn in the personal development journey. We learned that very young. So for me, it was almost like you learn how to read and write. It's like you learn how to introspect and reflect. And it took me decades to find out that that's not how everyone was raised, So it's always been a really big part of me. And funny enough, I've always been for as long as I can remember, I've had, mental health issues. I've dealt with depression. Even as a kid, I don't remember being happy, right? I remember being miserable as a child. I grew into my teenage years. I developed all the different eating disorders you can have. I was this anxious and depressed and struggling, and it took me a long time to apply what my mom had taught us to my personal journey. But then once I got into that, I realized how much power we have over ourselves and how we feel and how we see ourselves and how we understand the world. And once I did that, I suddenly unlocked this life where I could actually be happy and where I could flourish and where I could do things I never thought was possible for me. And it did so much for me personally that at some point I was like, other people need this, right? I can't hold on to this by myself. So I slowly got into more personal coaching also during COVID. There's like a lot of time on my hands. I had people reaching out after I had moved to Rwanda. I had people from Denmark still reaching out to me for my advice, for my feedback, to check in with me and see what my perspectives were. So I was like, okay, I think there's a coach in me somewhere. And then it still took me a really long time to figure out what type of coach I wanted to be. Because, when you have something that's such a deep part of you, you take it for granted. So it's like, are other people gonna find this valuable? Am I gonna be able to help people with anything here? Isn't all of this just obvious information? So when I started my coaching journey, I tried to be very specifically like, I want to teach people sales. I want to teach them this and this and that they can, things that I was learning that I thought I'm going to teach this, that I'm learning to other people. And then eventually I realized I have all of this inner wisdom from my journey, from everything that I've overcome. That needs to be my focus. And when I unlocked that part, it was like things just got into flow, right? Things came, I can just sit and talk for hours. I didn't have to think about what was that thing that other coach taught me that now I'm trying to teach other people. I didn't have to stop my recordings I tried to do for YouTube every 30 seconds because I was like, what am I going to say next? It's like, it flows, it comes, it's part of who I am. So that was kind of the long story on how did I get into transformational coaching.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. The story almost takes you by surprise in the beginning because you would think, oh, okay, you grew up with your mom teaching you all these tools and healing modalities and mindset work, and you would think, oh, okay, your life would be not perfect, but you got it. But you're like, no, wait, I was actually really struggling. And it just maybe wasn't the time for you to absorb that information. And
Right.
sometimes it's like it shows how much even though there's one perception being shown to us and how much we don't know what's going on in the back end and what's going on behind the scenes in someone's life. And so I appreciate you sharing that so vulnerably and so real that it took me by surprise. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Wow, not expecting that turn. I do relate a lot to your coaching journey, because for me too, like in the beginning, I was like, oh, I'll be like a time management coach.
Yeah.
Because I thought logically that was what you're supposed to do, or I thought that was what would make money, right? You kind of take that logical approach to it of like what can work. And but then when you look within, and I think I did have one mentor tell me that she's like, not everything you learn, you need to go and make money from it. Not everything you learn, you need to go and make a program out of it. And this is even the healing stuff as well. It's not just how to sell yourself, but it's also like I've done breath work, but I'm not here teaching breath work. If it felt aligned for me to do it, then yes, that's a different story. But it's not everything you take on, not everything you learn that you need to like go and figure out a way to profit from it. And I think that does, going back, that does work with that logical mind. And so in your experience, because you said in the beginning you would take on logically what made sense, with the sales aspect, how did you make that shift, like from coming out of the logical mind and trusting the universe in your journey and what you're sharing that worked for you?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because, they say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I had suddenly a bunch of different teachers coming in and teaching me more spiritual approaches to my coaching. And I think there's a deep spiritual element in me that was just hidden. I was so much in my head. I had such a good friend who was very spiritual in a way that I didn't know other people who were that like woo woo full on, right? So what she did is like she tried to bring me on. She was like, I feel like you need to go and just feel yourself and experience yourself. And I was like, what books can I read about that? Right? She was like, stop reading, stop reading, start experiencing, start feeling. And I was like, I don't even understand that. How do I even do that? And it took a while for me after that to start getting more. I had tried meditating, right? I was one of those people. I tried meditating, it didn't work. I tried meditating. As soon as I started meditating, my head would be running and running and running. And I've been so stuck in my head for such a long time. And it's helped me a lot, right? Most of my transformational work that I did throughout my teens and my 20s were from my head, if not 100% of it. And it did take me really far. But it also, at some point, I had to realize that if you start applying your mind and your mindset, in the coaching industry, mindset is so key in everything. You literally have people saying mindset is everything. I'm just like, that's dangerous, really, to say that and to have that kind of perspective. Because if you take your brain and your mind and you apply it to places where it doesn't belong, then you're just drowning all of the other things. And that's what I had been doing for a really long time. Everyone is like, oh, positive thing, you think positive, right? So you just override all of the negative emotion that you're carrying around. And you do that by just like pressing them down into your body. And you're walking around with like what feels like a pressure cooker inside of you. And you're one trigger at all point away from just bursting out on somebody and lashing out. You're like, oh, no, I'm so sorry. I don't know where that came from. And then you press it down some more, right? And there's a lot of us who tend to do that. I had been doing that for a really, really long time. So I had a lot of suppressed experiences and emotions that I had never dealt with. That now all of a sudden in my 30s, I was like, okay, now I have to figure this thing out. Why am I feeling all of these things? And at some point you become numb also. I see this happening a lot, and it happened to me too. It's like you suppress your emotions so much that in the end you just can't feel anything, right? You just walk around with like almost like a heartbeat monitor that has just gone complete, right? Because there's no ups, there's no downs, there's just nothingness and numbness. And then you can numb yourself some more by scrolling on social media all day and watching Netflix all day, and then you don't have to feel anything, and then you go to bed, and then there's such a detachment from our emotions. And I think when we do this thing about taking our logical mind and pushing it into areas where it doesn't belong, such as spiritual and emotional health, then we end up in this situation where we don't even know ourselves, right? So many people I know tell me that they have no idea what they're passionate about. So many people say they have no idea what they're passionate about. And how can you know what you're passionate about when you're running your entire life through your logical mind? When you're emotionally disconnected, when you can't feel anything anymore because you've written so much of your story from your mind, how can you know what you're passionate about? It's impossible. And I felt the same for a really long time. I tried to make all of my life decisions based on what is the smart thing to do. What can I do that's smart, right? Okay, my dad says this is a good idea. I grew up, my grandparents told me this was a good idea. And then you start living your life based on what was a really good idea 20, 30, 50 years ago that doesn't necessarily apply to today, and you don't feel any emotional connection to it. You can't find yourself being happy about it. And I would jump from project to project, to job and be like, how come none of this is interesting to me? How come I'm not finding joy in any of this? But the thing is, I had lost joy. I didn't know where joy was. I was just numb. I was drinking, I was smoking, I was, spending my weekends on the couch or in the club. And there is no emotional connection at all. So that's been a big part of my journey in this decade, in my 30s, to kind of tap into that.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. And I always made decisions logically. Like I always made decisions of what made sense. What was the smart thing to do? Again, as you said it. And it led to, for myself, it led a little bit differently. It was like I had goals and then I would accomplish them. And then it was now what? Now it's on to the next goal. And there was never a sense of fulfillment. There was never a sense of like gratitude for it. It was like, oh, in the moment the goal is happening and I'm like, this is awesome. But then it finishes and it was like, okay, now what? Well, I don't like this part of my life. Okay, now let's move on to the next thing. And it was always what is the external circumstances that can provide me gratitude and happiness and fulfillment, but it was never within me. And I think that is, again, that suppression, the suppression of emotions, trying to go life with that logical mind. Now, that mindset work in the coaching industry, it helps, I believe, in the beginning when you first dive into self-development, because I think if you are somebody who is listening and you're very logical and you use your mind to make decisions to live life that way, in the beginning, I believe in a self-development journey, it is because it challenges you. And feel free to like agree, disagree with me. Like I would love to hear your thoughts about this, but it's like it challenges you to think things differently and it opens you up. But then once you dive in deeper, then you tap into the emotional aspect of it, the spiritual, the soul connection. And then that's just a whole other level. Because I know for myself, if you had spoken to Julie 10 years ago and approached certain topics about emotional intelligence and inner child healing, I would have not, I would have been like, no, what are you talking about? I had a good upbringing. Life was good. Like, what are you saying? And I would have not made that connection. Like, no, I don't have trauma. Like, what do you mean? And I would have gotten triggered by that. So that is my personal experience with it. What are your thoughts around that in terms of like starting in the beginning with the mindset work?
I think you're absolutely right. It's a great place to start. And I think one of the reasons it's a really great place to start is because we're taught to live in our heads. We're taught to live in our heads. So it's a logical first step to take is to work on what's in our heads. And then eventually you reach a point where it's like, okay, now there's limits to what my head can do for me to open me up more. Like 10 years ago, I thought I had graduated personal development, because all of the personal development books and all of the mindset books I read, I was like, there's nothing new here. All of this, I practiced this while I was in my teens. I mean, this is just silly, right? And I was being very arrogant about it. And then all of a sudden, I started meeting people who were more spiritual, like bringing the more spiritual and emotional element into coaching. And I was like, wait, what is this world? And it was like a whole new world opened up to me. And I think it's a great second step to take. But if you have grown up with emotional intelligence, if you've grown up with a lot of spirituality, then it might not be the best first place to go. Maybe you need to explore that because it's more familiar. I just think it's less common. I think it's much more common for us to be taught to be in our heads. And that's why mindset work is so powerful. And it's not to take anything away from mindset work. I think mindset work is amazing, but it doesn't belong everywhere. It is not the whole package. It is part of the package, and it's an important part of the package, but it's not everything. And we can't solve everything from our heads because we will get disconnected to all of the other parts of us. And I think that's where a lot of us get stuck, is we think, oh, but mindset is everything. And then you can start arguing, oh, but you still use your thoughts to tap into your emotions. Like, yeah, there's still that connection, but the focus is different, right? And the feeling is different. And it's the allowing yourself to not just be fully connected to the head and just kind of soak into your own body, into your feelings, into everything around you, right? Just walk into a garden or park or something and kick off your shoes and stand there barefoot. And some people are going to say, that's crazy. But that's part of the human experience, right? We get desensitized from so many things. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because, yes, the mind is connected to the emotions, but it's the mind that sometimes creates the emotions. And so this is where I've been really kind of practicing, especially a lot in this past year, of disconnecting the mind and the emotions. And it's been really interesting just observing that, just watching what happens. It's like, oh, I feel emotion come up, especially when it's like the negative emotions like anxiety, sadness, anger, bitterness, frustration. And then I notice all of a sudden my mind creates a story.
Yeah.
So my mind is backing up that emotion. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Is this story true? Well, it feels true. It feels
Mm.
true, but it may be true or it may not be true. And so I'm like, okay, I recognize the thought because I don't want to disregard the thought. In my experience, if I disregard the thought, then that means I'm pushing a part of myself away, and I'm like, no, you can't be here. So I like kind of bringing the Julie version of that thought to the picture and being like, okay, I recognize the thought is here. And that's a thought. I'm allowed to have this thought. It's okay. It's valid. But now this is the emotion and it's separate. And the emotion is just anxiety. Okay, well, let's just sit with that and just allow it to be there. And it'll go away when it goes away. And it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't create a story, nothing. It's just there. And it's interesting how much faster that emotion just naturally passes on its own. And then I've noticed, like, yeah, sometimes that same emotion will come back with the same thought, but the frequency is different. And then it starts changing and it starts shifting. And it's not the same thing that triggers me. It's not the same things that bring it up. And so that has been a very interesting transformation for myself in this past year, is really disconnecting that because we live in our minds, we create any story about anything, everything. But the stories are not always true. How many
Yeah.
times have you read a message and you read it in one way and you
Yeah.
get triggered, right? You get triggered and
Do
you're like,
it. You add an attitude to it. Yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
go back a day later and you reread the message and it's something totally different.
Yes.
That's the power of the mind.
Yeah. It really is. And I think also on that, I mean, we spoke earlier about judgment, right? Judgment for me is such a powerful thing to look into because we tend to label everything. We have this idea that we need to put everything into boxes and we have an opinion about it, of whether it's good or bad. So we judge it and we label it and we decide that something is bad or something is good. And when we do that, it becomes incredibly hard to really see things more objectively. So one thing that I often do when I'm approaching a situation like this is like, okay, so I'm feeling an emotion and it doesn't feel good. And immediately it's like, it's a bad thing that has happened. Something bad must have happened. And all of the stories in the mind is running and running and running. And it's like, wait, let's just look at this from a more objective stance. What could have caused this? And does anything have to have caused it? Or am I just feeling it right now? Honestly, if you remove resistance from your emotion, if you allow it to just be, you have almost a transformative experience in that moment. Because whenever we feel something and it feels negative and we label it as negative, we're like, no, I don't want this feeling. And we start adding resistance, like, I want this feeling to go away. And the more we add resistance, the more powerful the feeling is, because it's like, I'm here, what are you going to do about it, right? What are you going to do about it? I'm here. So make up all of your stories in your head and sit with it and experience and live with it. And it's like, okay, let me just remove all of this, as you say, removing the stories that has nothing to do with what's going on right now. Just feeling this and just allowing yourself to feel it and being like, okay, I'm gonna experience this emotion right now. And I'm not gonna think of it as bad or good. I'm just gonna observe it and pay attention to what does it feel like in my body? Where am I feeling these things? And when you do that, and when the resistance reduces, you will see that that emotion almost just disappears by itself, simply because we decided to not resist it. It's really impactful, actually. Yeah.
It is interesting, especially when you just begin to observe your body. Like, as you said, where is it coming from? I do the same thing. I'm like, okay, where am I feeling this? Okay, it's around here. It's around the chest area. I'm like, okay, I can just breathe. We're cool. Just feel it. And then it just goes, oh, and you're like, well, where did it go? And, and it just disappears. And it's so interesting when you get to that point in the journey. And obviously everybody has a different journey, like different self-development and spiritual journey. And some people may have gotten through this early on, depending on their life circumstances, and then other people it's later on or midway. There's no saying when it's going to happen, but it is an interesting part because it's almost like shows that the emotions, whether they're positive or negative, they're not bad. They just are.
Yeah. And I feel like actually so-called negative emotion they're so powerful teachers. Nothing teaches me something more than pain. When I go through something painful, I expand in ways that I could have never done living only on positive emotion. The learnings that I get from sitting with the pain and dealing with the pain is so expansive, and it's making me feel so powerful. And it's really interesting because about a month or a month and a half ago, I broke up a dog fight and my leg got in the way and I got a really bad dog bite on my knee, and I was in excruciating pain. Like, I could not sleep at night. It was constant. Whenever I tried to move just a little bit, it was painful. Whenever I was lying still, it was painful. So I was just, for hours, I was trying to fall asleep and just being in excruciating pain. And during the whole time, I was thinking, I can get over this. Like, what's the alternative? First of all, it's not like I can shut it off, right? The pain is there. I have to deal with it. But I'm also proving to myself that I can deal with the pain. And it was such a powerful lesson, because the pain slowly, started to recede just a little bit, enough for me to be able to sleep eventually. And I knew that, the body heals. So eventually this pain will fully disappear. And it taught me so much. And then a couple of weeks later, I had an experience that gave me a lot of emotional pain, like really, really hard, difficult emotional pain. And I went straight back to the experience that I had trying to fall asleep with my knee that wasn't so much pain, which was like, I will get over this. I am able to handle this. I can deal with this pain. I can sit with it. I can feel it. I don't have to try and hide it. I don't have to try and shut it off. And this experience, by me just feeling this pain, is going to expand me, and it's going to make me feel even more powerful. And this was like a few days before I had to go on stage. for my second TEDx. And I was dealing with all of this emotional pain. And I was like, okay, how do I get on stage and put on a big smile and deliver a performance when I'm going through this stuff? And guess what? I did. And I did an even better performance than I did the time before, right? Where I wasn't really dealing with any big issues. So it really taught me who I am. You know, I showed myself what I'm capable of and what I'm able to do. And some people would have said, oh, it's such unfortunate timing that you had to go through these things while you had this thing to deliver. And I'm like, no, it was perfect timing, because I showed myself that I can stand up for myself and show up for myself no matter what, you know? And in that sense, the pain becomes the most important part of your journey of transformation. But when we keep trying to make decisions based on, let's avoid pain, I'm going to go in this direction because there's less risk of pain, then you also risking not getting the transformation that you could have had. So we're constantly labeling pain as being bad. We're labeling disappointment as being bad. We're labeling all of these things that can actually help us grow and expand in an incredible, powerful way. And we're labeling them as bad, as something we need to avoid. Well, then we miss out on such a big part of life, and we miss out on some of the greatest lessons that we can have.
I so believe that. I find that when I'm doing the deep inner work, I have so much more insight. I have so much more powerful things to share. And when you know you come out the other side and you're living your best life, honestly, that is where I post the least on my Instagram. Actual caption. I'm like, I have nothing to say. Life is good. Yeah, okay, what are you grateful for? Maybe those little fluffy stuff, but at this point, I don't even share that anymore because I'm like, no, you're allowed. You're going to go through ebbs and flows of life. You're going to come out of the darkness. You're going to be in the darkness. But when you are in the darkness, and for me, that's where the most deepest conversations, the most deepest topics just pop up. And I'm like, oh, I'm seeing this. I'm seeing this from another lens. I'm seeing this from a different level. And I love that you shared relating back to the emotional pain you're going through. And you're like, I went through the dog bite. And that was like a reminder that you were able to handle that. You can handle the emotional piece. And I do that as well with like the harder stuff like I've gone through in life. I'm like, okay, if I was able to go through homelessness and being broke at the same time, I think I can handle anything else life throws at me. And so, because when you are in the moment where things aren't going the way you want it to, or when things are feeling like they're falling apart, where it's just your external reality is hard, and I honor that. It does get hard sometimes and it does feel shitty and it is icky, and it's okay that it is that. I tend to just acknowledge what it is, but then I'm like, okay, but I can handle this. The universe wouldn't bring this to me now if I wasn't able to handle this.
I think that part, you know, life gives us exactly what we need. You know, I needed to spend the night in excruciating pain with my knee to prepare me for the emotional pain that I was going to experience a few weeks later. We get exactly what we need at all times, and whatever experiences that we have that may seem incredibly negative. You know, I went through, my mom was sick for many years. So she got sick when I was around maybe 10. She died when I was in my early 20s. So there was a long period of time of illness and difficulty around that, and then dealing with the grief of losing a mother. A lot of complex emotions in at a very young age. And I didn't really have a lot of people in my life who had lost a parent at that point. I was still, I was still relatively young at the time, so I didn't really have anyone who was able to help me through that. You know, I didn't have a lot of people to talk to who could really understand what I was going through. So when someone else that I knew lost a parent and they came to me and I was like, and they were, I need someone to talk to. I was like, that's so good that I have been through that, right? I mean, you can either say, I wish my mom would have never died, but I was like, you know what? She did. She died. And now I'm here and I have a lot of experience with grief and I'm able to help people hold themselves through their grief, and I'm able to talk to them in a way that they can feel better and get some of the stuff that I barely had access to, right? So I feel like every time we go through something that's just really painful, I'm always looking for the lessons in it. What am I learning right now? What is it that I'm getting from this experience that can expand me? And how can I put words on it in a way that I can help other people when they go through it in the future? And I guess this is part of being a coach also, right? We're constantly thinking about, what does this mean? How do I apply this? What does it mean in this context? And especially, how to apply my own framework, right? I live my own framework every single day of my life. But there's such a power in experiencing that. And I think we get exactly what we need to have. And if we keep having this idea that something bad happened to us, we will never understand that whatever is happening for us, even though it feels unjust, even though it feels unfair, even though it feels, you're just fully in your victim and owning that victim. It's like, but what is it doing for me?
Yeah. And I think this is where the logical mind has its place. Has its place. As you said earlier, you're saying it's part of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle. And this is in moments like this where it has its place. And that is, I think I posted a meme yesterday that I saw, and it was like, when I get triggered, this is my brain trying to figure out where can I pour more acceptance and compassion towards myself. And you see like the woman, she's thinking, and it's like all the mathematical problems. And that is me through and through. And I think this is like, again, our work and, putting our work into practice. And yes, I take breaks. I do take breaks, but there's times I'm like, oh, that triggered me. Okay, so what is it telling about me? What am I? And it's just, and I just try to like solve the puzzle, allow the emotion to sit there. I'm trying to solve the puzzle because I want to see where it came from. I want to see like, why did I get triggered? Wait, why did that bother me? And then there's other times where now what I actually started to do, because I realized I'm like, look, if I try to figure out every single trigger of my whole life, then I'm actually just like putting band-aid solutions. If
Yeah.
I'm too busy, like, oh, okay, this trigger and that trigger and that trigger. And I'm like, wait, I'm not actually healing. I'm like just putting band-aid solutions of trying logically to figure it all out. So now what I start to do is I get triggered. I'm like, okay, there's a trigger. Is it time to look within this one? Is this the timing right now to reflect and heal this? And usually there's an answer. There's an answer. You always know. And I'm like, oh, yes. Okay. All right. Let's, like take out the journal. Let's meditate. Let's feel the emotions, whatever it is that I'm feeling called to in that moment. And other times it's no. And I'm like, okay, we put it to the side. We allow the emotions, but we put the logical mind aside for now. And then it will pop up again. It always does. And you just honor when it pops up, that the next time maybe that's when you're going to go into it deeper, because in as being as like coaches and like in this spiritual practitioners and being in this self-development world, sometimes we can just get so caught up logically, right, with like needing to fix everything, needing to heal everything. We're like, oh my God, like I'm noticing, because we're so self-aware, which is beautiful. But when it's trying to sit there and like start putting band-aid solutions on everything, you're not actually doing the thing. You're not actually healing. Like you may be healing parts of it, but you're really just like, okay, I'm gonna put a pause here and a pause there and a pause there and a pause there. And then you got all of a sudden 10 triggers that you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, I like looking at patterns in my triggers. So allowing myself to observe them enough for me to be able to recognize a pattern. I feel like patterns are very powerful. I also feel like I saw a quote, and I don't remember exactly how it goes, and I don't remember who said it, but it went something like, some of you are so addicted to healing that you will never get well. Like we constantly need to find something to heal. And there's this part about, if you always need to heal, it means that you're never well, right? Because if if you always have to heal something, then that means that there's something that's broken. And sometimes I feel like, again, with the lens through of judgment, can we try to not look at everything as needing to be fixed and just allowing ourselves to be, and allowing ourselves to have feelings, and allowing ourselves to be human, and allowing ourselves to feel, negative things once in a while, or maybe lashing out a little bit and being like, you know what, I'm really sorry about how I handled that. I'm not sure where it came from. And honestly, today's not the day I'm going to figure it out, right? But you're still a very valid and beautiful human being that is deserving of love and compassion and all of these things. It's not, and I think especially in the beginning when you get on the coaching and personal development journey, is where like I have to fix everything, I have to become a perfect human being. It's like maybe less about trying to be perfect and more about how can you just really enjoy the journey and grow from the journey and find just excitement in your life, and allowing yourself to see. I mean, there's so many times throughout my journey, and still now, there's so many times where I catch myself being like, okay, I didn't show up in the way that I wanted to. There's definitely shortcomings here, and especially in a relationship, right? In a relationship, you're very, very close to another human being. And I would see myself sometimes, having more of an anger or disappointment or something, a negative emotion projected towards my partner, where he was not necessarily deserving of that. And I catch myself very often acting in ways and saying things and feeling things that aren't aligned with the person that I want to be. And then some people would say, oh, but you've been doing this work for decades. How is it not, how have you not fixed yourself yet? I feel like it's just such a lifelong journey. We need so much time and attention and putting effort into this journey for us to continue to grow. And just imagine for a second how boring it would be if we had just completed personal development now, right? There's so much life left, hopefully. So much life left. Like, how can we allow ourselves to just have that space to continue to grow and to continue allowing ourselves to not be perfect?
Yeah, that is powerful. And it's so true because it is a lifelong journey. And I love that you always feel like you need to heal, then it means you're not whole, but you are whole. And one of the things I had thought of, this was like actually a few years ago. I'm like, every time something doesn't go our way, every time something we don't get the results we want, our mind all of a sudden goes to, well, we need to fix this, like there's something wrong. And then that's where we get into that, like healing cycle. But what if not every time something doesn't go our way that there's actually something to heal about? We're creating a story that something needs to be healed, but sometimes there is nothing to be healed. And sometimes, as you said, you are going to lash out, you are going to say the wrong thing, you are going to mess up, but it doesn't mean that in that moment, like, oh, okay, well, there's maybe something from your childhood there. Maybe you just fucked up at the end of the day. And maybe that's all there is to it. And it's like, and you are human and you are going to have those moments, no matter how many years of self-development journey you have under your belt. Like, we are all human. We're all going to say the wrong thing. We're all going to make a mistake. But there's a beauty in that because, right, if we all said, again, you said you like once the, like if the self-development journey were to end now, then it's like, well, it'll be boring. And it's true. Like if we were all perfect, if we all answered the perfect thing to say every time we reacted the perfect way, we got everything we wanted perfectly, where's the like the thrive? Where's the like, I feel like when I kind of overcome something difficult, I'm like, whoa, like I got through that. Like there's a certain appreciation for self and a pride of myself of like, wow, I went through that. Now you take that away and it's like, oh, well, everything I do, I get. Everything I say, everybody has a perfect response. I have the perfect response. And it's like, well, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also when we do mess up and when we do try to get something, it doesn't happen, very often there's just some sort of learning in it. It's like, oh, maybe the learning is that you came on a little bit too strong, right? It doesn't mean necessarily that there's a trauma to be healed. Maybe it's just like, oh, next time I'll be a little bit more slow. I'll be less needy. I'll be less urgent. I'll be like, I'll just give the process more time to unfold. Sometimes it just wasn't meant for you. Sometimes you maybe try to aim a little bit too high compared to what is your actual experience or what do you actually have to offer for this opportunity. And sometimes we just gotta, it's just the wrong place, the wrong time. There's so many different things that it could be. It doesn't need to have anything to do with childhood trauma. And I think Myron Golden, he has such a good quote. He always says, all work works. It either works for you or it works on you. And if it doesn't work for you, it needs to work on you for long enough that it can actually work for you, right? And he's an excellent salesperson. He's always talking about how he went a year and a half before he made his first sale. He was so bad at sales. He didn't a year and a half before he made his first sale. And he was like, it had to work on me for all of this time for me to learn how to do sales, and just because we haven't developed a skill doesn't mean that there's something to be healed. It just means that, oh, we got to learn that skill, right? And I think also sometimes, especially when we're taking a more spiritual approach to things, it can very quickly become this idea that everything is from an old wound that needs to be fixed, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just, oh, I got to get better at marketing, I got to get better at whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So true. It is so true. And that is like that is sometimes it is just as simple as that. And I think sometimes we just overcomplicate it. But again, getting out of the mind into the body and you check in. And I think that is like the checking in is the key piece. Like, is there something deeper here? Is it something simple? Do I need to look at this right now? Can I look at it later? Another one that I like to ask myself, especially when it's an emotion, and I sometimes, because I'm an empath, and sometimes I pick up emotions that are not mine, I like to check in. Does this belong to me?
Yeah.
These small little questions that when we ask ourselves, like especially when they're simple as yes or no, because the yes or no allows you to tune into the body and get out of the, making up stories in your head or making up excuses or reasoning. You kind of just get right into the body and you feel the body. There's going to be some sort of like, yeah, like there's going to be something. It may not be an obvious yes or no, but you're going to feel pulled towards one of the ends. And if you're still unsure, for those who are listening, you can always have someone else ask you as well. Sometimes when we have someone else kind of giving us the questions, it allows us to come up with answers that we can't ourselves. That is like one trick I like to use. Do you have any advice or tips for the audience in regards to that?
I think when it comes to checking in with yourself, don't expect to have it all figured out in the beginning all at once, but learn from your experiences. So one thing that I saw a lot, that I've seen so much, is that there was a knowing in me and I ignored it. And eventually time would tell that my feeling, my gut feeling was right the whole time, right? And the more I do this, just experiencing both following it, but also not following it, and then just seeing, okay, I should have trusted it, right? And I didn't. And I do that. I still do that all the time, right? I should have trusted it and it didn't. So it's like just allowing yourself to learn from it, because it does come more with experience. The more you pay attention and the more you notice your gut feeling, the more strongly you will feel it in the future. The more experiences that you're getting from listening to it and not listening. It's not the end of the world if you don't follow your gut feeling, right? It's a guide. And if you don't follow it, you'll get that experience of, I should have followed it. I'm still alive, right? And I'm alive to not follow it or follow it again in the future. So just giving yourself grace in the learning journey, really. Don't beat yourself up if you felt something and you didn't follow it. Don't beat yourself up if you thought you have felt something and it turned out not to be what you thought it was. just use all of the experiences to recognize patterns and see how, okay, what did it really feel like at that point? What does it really feel like at that point? And how can you learn from that? And remember that you have a lifetime, right? I mean, we don't know how long we have, but we have a whole lifetime to figure these things out. So just allow yourself that. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And that is just such a beautiful way to wrap this up. I want to thank you, Rebecca, so much for being on this podcast. Please tell the listeners if you have anything going on in your world right now or how they can find you, follow you. I will be putting everything in the show notes as well. And I'll throw in those TEDx talks. If you have any of those recordings, I would love to put that in. So yeah, tell the audience.
Yes, so the best way to reach out to me is on Instagram. I am Rebecca Hansen. I'll send you also the handle so that you have it. I can also add my email address. You can always shoot me an email if you want to get in touch. I am also launching this month, which will then have launched by the time this is released, a membership called Identity Alchemy, where we work on building, you know, alchemists used to try to turn base metals into gold. So we're doing that with our identities, doing the identity shifting work to become the gold version of ourselves. And I'll be releasing monthly mini courses and bringing people on the journey to just this self-transformation. So I think that could be something really interesting to join if you're into personal development, if you want to do more identity shifting and really get to know yourself and get on this transformational journey. It'd be a great place to be. It's going to be so much fun. So I'll send you the sign up link when that's ready as well. Yeah, so that would be pretty much it.
I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you for all those who are listening. And I will catch you next time.